Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 39th installment of the Galen Data Medical Device Innovation Webinar Series. I'll be your host today. My name is Dwayne Mancini, and I'm the CEO at Project MedTech. Today, we'll be hearing from Karandeep Singh Badwal at QRA Medical for a conversation on everything you need to know about software as a medical device, common pitfalls, software development, and regulatory considerations. But first, a few housekeeping slides and some information on Galen Data. Galen Data is an FDA-compliant cloud for medical device manufacturers. The Galen Cloud provides a configurable platform for device-to-cloud connectivity that is compliant to FDA, HIPAA, and CE mark standards. The company is ISO 13485 certified, and the product on AWS is high trust certified as well. Founded by seasoned medical device professionals, the company's goal is to make medical device cloud connectivity available to all at a fraction of the cost while shaving months off the development timeline. Galen Data allows medical device companies to stay medical device companies and not become IT companies. Finally, some quick logistics here. You will see on the right-hand side of your screen or in your control panel, wherever that sits, there are a couple handouts. There is one on Galen Data, and there's also a white paper that Galen Data wrote as well. There's also the ability to drop questions in for Karandeep as we kind of go through here. I will monitor that. If it's a question that's pertinent to a topic Karandeep is speaking to, I'll kind of pipe in and ask him that question. If not, we'll save some of them for the end of the presentation. And as a reminder, you'll receive a recording of this webinar via email, and feel free to follow up with any of us should you have any additional questions. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Karandeep Singh Badwal. Karandeep, the virtual floor is all yours, sir.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me on. Can you see my screen, Dwayne?
Not yet.
I see, because I paused myself. Let's see what's happening here. Sorry, some technical issues. Give me a second.
Yeah, no worries. Yep. Karandeep, while we're doing that, I'll just give some background from what I know. I'll kill some time here for you. So you found a QRA Medical, correct? Is that you're the founder of that company, is that right?
Yep, that's completely correct.
Awesome. And I guess while we're waiting for this to come up, Karandeep, do you want to give a background on yourself and kind of qualifications, that sort of thing?
Sure, yes, of course. So start with introduction myself. So yep, I'm Karandeep, and I'm the founder of QRA Medical. I believe my screen is now working, Dwayne, if I'm correct. It was working.
We still cannot see it. Yeah, it came up and then it went away.
Let's see. Let's try another one. So yeah, sorry about this. So yeah, QRA Medical is a quality and regulatory consulting firm working within the medical devices space. And I should start with my intro as well while I try to correct this. So effectively, within the medical devices space, I used to work within your traditional medical devices, things like your pacemakers, defibrillators, etc. And then over the past sort of 3 to 4 years, I began to see this boom in software medical devices, AI, machine learning, etc., and decided to move towards that direction, which is what I'm going to be talking about today as well. And again, the concept of a software in itself just being a medical device alone was kind of alien until about sort of 4 to 5 years, where it became a bit more commonplace. Usually in the past, software was something that was paired with a physical medical device, maybe used for operational purposes or maybe incorporated into it. But again, this idea of the word device as well, you know, if you say to somebody device, they're often thinking of something physical, not necessarily a software. And another concept of that, of course, is something like property. When people hear the word property, they're often thinking of something physical. But we're moving into this world now where you have things like digital property and digital software, as it seems that that is where the future is currently moving towards. So.
Great, awesome. And Karandeep, maybe people can see your screen, and maybe I just can't. Actually, I wonder if someone can just drop in the chat whether you can see Karandeep's screen or not here.
It should be working
There
now,
we
if
go.
I'm correct. There we are.
Yep, we can see it now. Yep, great.
Right, perfect. Yep. So sorry about that, guys. It's the joys of the modern world.
Now we're off and running. All right, Karandeep, all
Sure.
you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Dwayne. So the purpose of today's topic, developing a software medical device. This is quite an interesting one, especially when you're kind of new to this space, and there's often some things that you may be uncertain about if you're not from a medical device background, or even if you are from a medical device background and you want to move into software. This is something that might be completely new to you, and you may be unsure in terms of how exactly do you go about doing this. I'd also be discussing the common pitfalls as well. What are the common mistakes that I'm seeing companies make, or maybe some tips that I can give to make sure that you have better development. What is the process of software development even look like? You know, if you're completely new to software in itself, what exactly does this look like? And of course, the interesting one, of course, is the regulatory considerations. Regulations written at a time where software medical devices wasn't really a thing, and it seems to be growing more and more. So again, how exactly do you go about that? And what are the different gray areas that you perhaps need to be aware of effectively? So an overview, what exactly am I going to be talking about today, if I've already mentioned? So what makes a software a medical device? You know, not every single software can be a medical device. A software can be a video game. It could be something like Microsoft Word that you use for word prescribing. But what exactly is it about a software at a point where it becomes a medical device? And of course, there's going to be some gray areas, which I'll be talking to you about as well, in terms of what may necessarily have some health claims, but may not exactly be a medical device. And of course, where does fitness and wellness fit into that? You know, would it be a medical device? Yes or no? The regulatory requirements for software medical devices, you know, the questions I often get, is it any different? Is it the same regulations? Are there different regulations for software medical devices? How do you go about that? Cybersecurity, that's a very important one as well. If you have a software medical device, and especially if it's connected to the internet, then it's going to be transmitting information. Of course, anything that's going to be going online, of course, needs cybersecurity. Is something that we need to really be aware of. And if anyone in the audience here works in quality and regulatory, and it's been doing submissions in the US, you would actually quite notice that the FDA is hot on cybersecurity at the moment. So it's something that you want to get right every single time effectively. The common pitfalls, what are the common mistakes that I'm seeing companies making? And then of course the top tips. And of course the golden question, which I get a lot as a bonus, is which market do you enter first, the US or the EU? It's a very interesting one, and there's no clear-cut answer for it. So what is a medical device? That's the first thing that we need to establish if we just remove software from the equation for now. As you can see, I've got the definition here from the EU MDR, and then I have the definition here for the USA. So for the purposes of the EU, so medical device means many instruments, apparatus, appliance, physical, and it specifically uses the word software. So we can see that the term medical device itself is not just restricted to physical products. Implant, reagent, material, and any other article of the manufacturer, and it goes by intended use, and it's for human beings. So what we're talking about medical devices, we're not talking about veterinary applications, it's human beings, and it's all to do with this intended by the manufacturer for diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, treatment, or alleviation of disease, and also similar for injury or disability. So as we can see here, it's driven by the intended use. What do you intend to do with that particular piece of software? If you're diagnosing, preventing, monitoring, predicting, treating diseases, then you know you're a clear-cut medical device. Whereas if you've just got a software that's just helping you improve your fitness, and depending on the claims that you make, that may not necessarily be a medical device. Now, if we go to the FDA definition over here, you can see here per section 201H of the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act devices and instruments, apparatus, implement, machine, contrivance, implant, in vitro reagent, or any other simulator article and component part or accessory, which is again intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals. So again, it all goes down to the intended use, and that's a word that I'm going to be using a lot of today, intended use.
Hey, Karandeep.
Sure.
A question that kind of came in right off the get-go is understanding the difference between MDDS, device and non-device, and SaMD. You want to hold that off? You kind of address that throughout here.
I will bring that up. So yeah, general medical software and software as a medical device. That's something I'm going to be coming onto in the later slides. But again, if I don't answer the question in the later slides, feel free to bring it up at the end.
Yeah, cool.
Sure.
All right.
So general wellness, this is an interesting one with the FDA as well. So like I was talking about earlier, if you have some sort of software out there that's maybe something like, just to do with exercise or stretching, etc., you're probably not going to be falling under what's known as a medical device. So if we have a look here, what the CDRA defines as general wellness products, it's not just limited to software, it could be products as well. It says things like exercise equipment, audio recordings, video games, software programs. So if you look at it as software programs, so again, if you're going to make claims like prevent injuries, expedite recovery, provide specific diagnostic information, this would often fall under the scope of the device. Now, again, if you just have a general wellness device and it's, increased motivation to exercise, it may improve quality of life. It could be fitness tracking. It could be providing exercise plans. It could be just general stretching. An example that I can probably give here of a general wellness product is you may have an app on your phone which helps you with, stretching before you go for exercise. It's not making any claims to just help you for stretching. Now, somebody may get that app and then develop it so it can be used by physiotherapists. Now, the moment it's being used by physiotherapists to start providing treatment, and so use the word treatment, then at that point you may be considered to be a medical device. So you can quite clearly see here how the same product, depending on the claims that you make and who's going to be using it and the end user, can possibly be a medical device. So again, you have to be very, very careful in terms of the claims that you are making when it comes to your medical devices. So it's always driven by the claims. That is the key factor here to remember on most occasions. So to the next one. So when does a software become a software medical device? What is it about a software medical device? So I think first of all, we need to establish what is a software medical device? What does that mean? SaMD. So SaMD basically is an independent software that is a standalone medical device. So standalone in itself is a medical device and is intended to treat, diagnose, monitor, or drive patients' care effectively. Now, in some cases, you may have a software medical device that maybe has a physical element to it. So it may be the case that you have a software medical device that's paired with a physical tool for the purposes of data collection. So an example that I can probably come up from the top of my mind is, for example, detection of COPD. It may be a software that's detecting that, but there may be an apparatus that you breathe into. So that physical product in itself is not a medical device. It's maybe what's known as a programmable electromechanical system. So something that's paired with your software medical device in order for it to do its job. But you can see here the device itself is the software, not the physical element. So a SaMD can have a physical element. It's not always just a standalone, just a medical device in itself. And like we were talking about in the previous slide as well, it's important to know that general fitness and wellness apps are not considered software medical devices as per the IMDRF, EU MDR, and also the FD&C Act 520's 1A. But again, it's all to do with the claims that you're making. Sometimes if you ever go onto the App Store or the Play Store and you see some of these fitness and wellness apps, if I look at some of them claims, in my opinion, sometimes they're bordering on being a medical device. So they have to be very, very careful. So again, if your software is not diagnosing, it's not treating, it's not mitigating, it's not preventing, then strictly speaking, it's not a medical device. An example that I could give, of course, is a sleep tracking app. For example, on my wrist, I have a fitness watch, and then that goes to a sleep tracking app. It's not telling me I have any conditions or anything. It's simply telling me the quality of my sleep, how many hours I slept, the phases of sleep that I was in, and that's simply and how many times I woke up in the night. It's not making any claims whatsoever. And another example of software that's not a medical device is electronic health record software. Whereas previously, 10 to 15 years ago, you may be going into your general practitioner's office, you have to manually fill in a form. You may now be doing this on your mobile phones where you get a text message before you go in and they give you a link and you fill that in. Again, that's just collecting information. Now, another one, that term that people, I haven't seen a lot of, you see a lot of SaMD, but there's another one also called SIMD, S-I-M-D. So that is software that is embedded as part of a hardware medical device and is necessary to drive the intended medical purpose. But again, it's not the medical device in itself. So for example, it could be software embedded into pacemakers or infusion pumps for the purposes of their function. So the software in itself is not a medical device, but the software is needed for the hardware to do its role effectively. So that's what's known as SIMD. So it's software in a medical device, and the other term is software as a medical device. And they can be quite easy to confuse if you're new to this industry. And if you've now decided, okay, you are a software medical device, it's very important that you see it like this. You are developing a software that happens to be a medical device. Always see it like that. Sorry, I got the term wrong. Sorry, that's a mistake on my part. Sorry, you're developing a software. Sorry, you're developing a medical device that happens to be a software. That's the terminology I should have used. That's incorrect on the slides. Not that you are developing a software that is happening to be a medical device. So see it as a medical device first, and then software after. That's the best way that you're seeing it. And then all the regulations and everything makes sense. Whereas if you just see it as a general software that happens to be a medical device, then the importance of regulation may not really come along with that, basically. So categorizing software as a medical device, how exactly are they categorized? So if we look at the IMDRF guidance documents, we can see here that software as a medical device often fall under 4 different categories. What is driving these categories? So we can see on the left, state of healthcare situation or condition. Would it be critical? Would it be serious? And would it be non-serious? And then we can look at the top, is the significance of the information provided by software as a medical device to healthcare decision. So if it's simply informing clinical management, we can see that it falls under 1 to 2. And I'll give an explanation in a few seconds of what 1, 2, 3, and 4 mean and how you fall under them. So basically, what we're looking for here, you can see is a category 1 and 2, relatively low risk. It's just informing clinical management. It's not driving any decisions. And we can see how it corresponds whether that information is critical, serious, or non-serious. Then if you're driving clinical management, you can then see that that risk goes up. 1 in each column effectively apart from the bottom. And then of course, if it's treating and diagnosing and is critical, then it will be of the highest categorization. So what exactly are examples of these categories of medical devices? So a category 1 medical device would be something like an app that calculates BMI. This is used as a data point to simply inform to somebody that maybe they need to gain weight or they need to lose weight, but doesn't directly inform their outcomes effectively. But that person in itself may have a serious or critical condition that might be related to that BMI. Again, you're not driving or treating any information. You're simply telling them the BMI, whether it's high or whether it's low. Category 2, again, this is a slightly higher one now, is software intended for healthcare professionals, is an example, and they're using algorithms to analyze patient information such as blood pressure, heart rate, weight, age to determine the patient's condition, patient-specific things. Category 3, now if we look at what we're looking at category 3, that could be driving clinical management critical or treat and diagnose serious. That could be a treatment planning system with detailed parameters in order to support that person in their treatment effectively. And then category 4, this is the highest one. An example will be a software that analyzes inputs to diagnose and make decisions for acute stroke patients or meningitis in children. Now, as you can imagine, as we're seeing there, treat or diagnose and critical, we can see how something like that may fall under that category. So these are the categories of software medical devices as per the IMDRF guidelines. So safety classifications of software. So this is one is for the people that here are familiar with software medical devices, we have something known as IEC 62304. So what exactly is that? So IEC 62304 is basically the go-to standard for software medical device development. That's basically what this standard is all about. So the software classes according to IEC 62304 are class A, class B, and C. And it's very important here that we talk about the difference between standards and regulation. People often get them mixed up. A regulation is a legal requirement, whereas a standard is best practice. So standards are not mandatory, but they are internationally recognized and they are best practices, but they are not regulations. So the regulation tells you do X, Y, Z, and usually the standard tells you the best practice of going about doing that. So yes, it is best practice to follow standards, but they are always strictly mandatory. IEC 62304 for software development is that international standards, internationally recognized, including by the FDA. So this standard here effectively has its own set of safety classifications. So we have class A, class B, and class C. So we see class A is no injury or damage to health is possible, very low risk. Class B, non-serious injury is possible. And then class C, death or serious injury is possible. So how exactly does it work? So if you were to follow 62304, you go by a set of questions. So you start at the top, the worst case scenario, class C, death or serious injury is not possible. First question you want to ask is, can a hazardous situation arise from a failure of the software? If the answer is no, straight away, class A. If the answer is yes, go to the second set of questions. You then need to evaluate the effectiveness of the risk controls you have in place. And then from there, you need to decide, does the failure of the software result in unacceptable risk? If the answer is no, straight to class A. If the answer is yes, you go down the decision tree. And then you end up with the final question, which is, what is the severity of the injuries possible? Is it a non-serious injury, or would it be a serious injury? And as we can see here by the wording, Class B if it's a non-serious injury, and Class C if it's a death or serious injury is possible. So that is the safety classifications of IEC 62304. So this is an interesting point that I should bring up as well. The UK MDR, the EU MDD, and the EU MDR 2017-745. So the UK MDR is the current regulation in the UK. The EU MDD is the previous directive that used to be the EU, and the EU MDR is the latest regulation which we conform to in the EU, which came out on the 26th of May 2021. Now, just for context here, for those who may not be aware, the UK MDR, the current UK regulation, is pretty much a carbon copy of the EU MDD. That is basically what it is at the moment. Now, why was there such an impact from MDD to MDR when it came to software medical devices? So for those not familiar with the UK and EU, we have a risk classification system of Class 1, Class 2A, Class 2B, and Class 3, with Class 3 being the highest. Now, when the medical device was about in 1993, this concept of software in itself being a medical device wasn't really something that came to mind when this directive was written. Hence, a lot of software medical devices were falling under what's known as Class 1. Now, if you are a Class 1 in the UK and EU and you don't have a sterile, measuring, or reusable function, you basically self-certify, which is you go to your local competent authority, you register there as a company, and you could be selling it in a way as 24 hours effectively. Now, you are required to have technical documentation, of course, but no one is there auditing you. Reason being, it's no risk. When the EU MDR came along, something interesting came along, which was something known as Rule 11. So software intended to provide information which is used to take decisions with diagnostic or therapeutic purposes is classified as a Class 2A. Except if such decisions have an impact that may cause death or irreversible deterioration, then it's a Class 3, or a serious deterioration of a person's state or health or surgical intervention, then it's a Class 2B. So as you can see here, a lot of software, just by the claims that they're making and what they're doing, automatically fell under a Class 2A. What does it mean if you're Class 2A or above in the UK or EU? It means that instead of self-certifying, you need to use an approved body or a notified body. Approved bodies is what we have for UKCA, and notified bodies is what we have for EU MDR. Many of these UKCA bodies are also EU MDR notified bodies as well. So effectively what happened, instead of now self-certifying, they now had to lodge an application with these approved and notified bodies, wait multiple months for an audit date, and then go through the cycle of an audit and potentially 3 audit rounds, which effectively brought the cost up and also brought their technical files up to scrutiny. So you can see how a lot of previously Class 1 software and medical device manufacturers who previously never audited for the technical documentation now had to be audited. And again, that brought flaws to them. And it weren't necessarily that they were doing anything wrong. It was just that when they were Class 1, they probably tried their best to make the technical documentation. But because it was never inspected or audited, how did they know it was up to scratch? When they started going for their MDR audits, they then begin to realize, oh, okay, there's a lot more work involved. So that was the case. Another interesting fact here as well is under the EU MDR, they have something called Article 10.9, which specifies the requirements for quality management system. Now, generally, if you follow ISO 13485, you tick every single box for that quality management system. The only difference is apart from registration and reporting. Now, interestingly, under the old EU MDD, because most software as medical device products were Class 1, therefore self-certified, they didn't actually require a full quality management system. They only required post-market surveillance, CAPA, product registration, and adverse reporting. A notified body audit of the technical file was not required. So you've gone from needing no notified body audit, partial quality management system, to now needing a full quality management system and a full audit from a notified and approved body. So straight away now, this has brought up the cost in the company. How has that happened? You have to pay these approved and notified body fees. You have to bring in-house resources to improve your technical documentation. Now, because you have a full quality management system, you may need to hire somebody like a quality and regulatory manager and maybe provide them support. So straight away, this Rule 11 in itself, what it actually did is it pulled some of these software medical device companies off the market because they decided that the EU MDR was effectively too much a hassle for them. And for those existing companies, it brought up their cost in terms of bringing resources in and their products quite a lot. So this was a very, very important change. that came in as part of EU MDR. It's a very important part of software medical device, and it's something that everyone should understand. So the EU MDR risk classifications. So what are the risk classifications as we spoke about earlier? So we got class 1, 2A, 2B, and 3. And as we mentioned here, effectively, in terms of Rule 11, everything is class 2A and above. So if we look at this diagram here, this is a much easier way to see effectively how the classifications are driven. So if something is considered to be low, as in only informing clinical management, then it's effectively class 2A. So this is going back to the categories that we talked about earlier with 62304 and how they might align. So again, if we look here now at medium, so it's driving clinical management. If it's non-serious and serious, it's class 2A. And then if it's medium and critical, it's class 2B. So as we can see here, 2 out of 3 for medium fall under class 2A, and pretty much everything for low falls under class 2A. Now, if we look at high as is treating or diagnosing, if it's non-serious, it's a 2A. If it's serious, it's a 2B. And if it's critical, it's a class 3. So that is basically how the EU MDR risk classification works for software medical devices. It starts off as minimum class 2A, if falling under Rule 11, which most do, and then all the way up to class 3. So for those who are actually interested in the difference between class 2A and class 3, there will be more technical documentation requirements effectively, and you might need to provide more evidence, and there'll be more scrutiny in terms of the technical data that you submit if you fall under a higher classification. So you want to develop a software medical device. What now? How do you start? First thing I recommend everybody here should do is do some market research and look at it from the point of health economics. What is your why? What are you looking to achieve with your device? Don't just go out there and say, hey, it seems like we can get this device on the market in 6 months, great. But then what if it doesn't sell? So actually go out there and just look at this from a marketing perspective. We just remove medical device from this. Is it economically viable for you to put this product onto the market? So always do some market research, maybe some health economics modeling to work out, is it viable for us to take this product onto the market? And another interesting point as well, I know Dwayne and me have talked about this offline as well, is have a look to see what the other competitors in your market are doing. If there's 100 versions of your device out there and you want to create a software medical device, why would I want to go with your product? Why is it any different to the others? And also an interesting one, and this is a factor, particularly with the people who ever worked with the 510K. If you go onto the 510K database, and this is for the US FDA for those who may not be familiar with the term 510K, if you go onto the 510K database, you will come across products that have a 510K, but you will not find any evidence whatsoever of them being sold onto the US market. Why is this the case? Now, in some jurisdictions around the world, it's easier for you to get on their market is if you have a US approval or an EU approval. So effectively, some companies out there are going for the US 510K because they see that as the easy route, and then going back to the jurisdiction of where they want to sell and then using that to accelerate their path to market. So in some cases, you may see products out there with a 510K that have never ever hit the US market. So that's something that you need to consider as well.
Hey, Karen,
Another point to consider. Sure. Go ahead.
I was going to add 2 comments there because we have multiple companies going through exactly what you just described right now. I think to your point about the value is you need to look at, are you creating value, but also in what geographies you're creating value. Something that might be valuable in the US might not be valuable in the UK and vice versa, right? And then I think the other thing is to share an example, we have a company who's going to get a 510K this year, and we won't sell a single product in the US. We'll be commercializing in a number of different countries and achieving clinical data to build a stronger commercialization plan for the US in 2025. So just wanted to share 2 quick examples on that.
Yeah, Dwayne, it's very much common. It's happening more and more. It's just many people may not be aware. And this is for the benefit of the people. Maybe this is the first time going into the medical device market or first time going into software medical device. And even when I first started my career, I was thinking, why was this the case? Until I started to see that was the case, as you just mentioned, Dwayne. Sometimes easier to get a 510K and go back to the jurisdiction of where you want to sell. So that's something you need to consider as well. Another one that you need to consider, of course, is the reimbursement. As Dwayne's point as well, depending on the jurisdiction of where you want to sell, the reimbursement code that you get in the US may not be profitable for you, but then if you bring it over to the UK, it may well be the case, and then vice versa for different product codes. So again, look to see what the reimbursement is like for your device. Is it profitable for you to actually go for that? So again, and this is a very, very important one, software as a medical device. Now, if you create a software medical device that requires a lot of computing power, how many parts of the world have the infrastructure in order for them to use that? So if you create, hypothetically, again, I'm not a computer expert here, but if you create something that requires 10 gigabits of RAM and a 6 gigahertz CPU, or whatever they may call it, how many places around the world have the infrastructure to do that? I mean, I can walk through my local hospitals here in the UK, and I can see computer systems that are maybe 15 years, 20 years older than what I have in my house. Would they be able to run such complex software medical devices? The answer is no. So you need to work out what is the computing power required for your software medical device, what is the operating system that will be working on, and how many places around the world have that infrastructure in order for them to use it. You may have a fantastic product, but if people don't have the infrastructure to use it, is it really worth it? An example that I can give you is when the 4K TVs were coming out, people were going out and buying 4K TVs, but there were no television stations or movies at the time that could be played in 4K. So again, great product to have, but then they couldn't really make use of it. So that's another point to consider as well. It's a little bit more specific to software medical devices. And again, with software medical devices, if you go to some jurisdictions around the world, you also count in the fact of things like power cuts, the availability to computer systems. Do they have this in their places? And if they don't, how exactly are you going to get that product over there? So these are other factors that you really need to consider at the early stages. The last thing you want to do is bore hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly millions, and they realize there's no market for your product. So you want to do this right at the start. So back on the topic of software medical devices. So first thing we need to do is develop the road plan. So what should the road plan consider of? There's planning and preparation, consider that step one. Then number two, there's development. And then number three, there's validation. And then of course, documentation of records, or maybe a better way to say that, that's around the time where you've got everything in place to make that submission to whichever authority you're looking to go into. So what exactly is in the planning and preparation stage? First of all, of course, your regulatory plan. Which market do you want to go to? Okay, we want to go to, for example, one part of the world, and this is the way of going around it. Okay, maybe we need to get a US approval, maybe we need to get an EU approval, maybe a UK. So you're going to plan that activity out. It may be that you're going to target multiple jurisdictions, and then you say, okay, maybe we're going to go US first, and then we'll do EU later. So get that plan in place. So again, once you then have that, is you want to come up with a intended use statement, which I'll be going on to in a later slide, where you actually work out, what is your product? What does it do? What is the target demographic? What is the target audience? Would it be used in a clinical setting? Would it be used in a home setting? Would it be used in an emergency use setting? All of that sort of thing as well. So this is where you're basically prototyping and then coming up with what that device is going to be. Once you've got that plan in place, you then want to move to the development stages. This is when you start developing the algorithm, you start testing it out, you start doing things like your verification reports, and you start to see how it works. So now you've planned the software medical device, you've developed the medical device, now you want to validate it. And what does validation basically mean is it able to do the job that you want it to do? And this is an important term that I think people should understand, is the difference between verification and validation. So if I was to go online and buy myself a jacket, the verification will be that I look at the jacket and I go, great, it's got 2 arms, it's got pockets, it's got a zip, and it's going to do the job. The validation part is, can I put the jacket on? If this is a winter jacket, can I put the jacket on? Does it fit me well? And am I able to wear it in cold temperatures and it keeps? So basically, that's what validation is. Is it able to do the job that you expect it to do? So in the validation stages, where you'll be doing things like the performance testing, validating the algorithm, is it able to give the outcomes that you want it to give? The deployment procedure, how exactly you're going to go about deploying it, clinical performance studies, and also clinical performance reports. So that's a brief summary of what you'll be doing in the validation stages. And then the documentation of records, this is around the time, or maybe better wording I should have used, is around submission time. So this maybe you want to get your sales and marketing in order, let them know that maybe that's going to be happening. You're going to start preparing your quality management system. You're maybe going to get your submissions in order and get your final documentations in. And so at this point, you have your quality management procedures in place, you have your design history file in place, your software design specifications, etc. So that is basically the plan of what you want to have, and you want to have that right at the start. And please be realistic with your timelines, and especially if you're coming to the EU. So I know the average time for a 510K is around 180 days, what I last looked at. But in the EU, the amount of expertise that there is in software medical devices is less than that of something like a traditional product that's been around for decades, like a pacemaker. Hence, when you lodge an application with a notified body for the software medical device, you could be waiting up to 12 months for that initial audit date. So again, if you have a road plan saying, hey, we want to be in the EU market in 6 months, that's going to be very, very unlikely considering the situation. So again, go back to the start when we talk about planning and preparation. We were talking about the regulatory plan and the markets you're going to go to. Work out your timelines and how long it's going to take, and then plan accordingly. So what we were talking about was an intended use statement. So before we even get to these stages, so in the planning stage, the first one that we're talking about, we need to have what's known as an intended use statement. So what exactly is in the intended use statement? So as we can see here, we want to be talking about the intended medical indication. So first of all, what exactly is the indications for this product? So what I mean by that effectively is, what are the conditions or diseases to be screened, monitored, treated, or diagnosed? What are the conditions that we're looking at? Are you going to be screening them? Are you going to be monitoring them? Are you going to be treating them? Why I'm asking you these questions, if you go back to the previous slides, if you're screening, monitoring, treating, or diagnosing, that can potentially drive the classification, the risk classification, of course, that your software medical device falls under. Now, of course, you need to have the clinical data to back up the conditions or diseases that you're going to be working with. So which ones of which do you actually have the data for? There's no use saying that we can cure 50 different diseases if the clinical data only supports 2. So you want to get that early on. Intended patient population, this is an interesting one as well, is again, what are the demographics? What are the genders that you're working with? What are the age groups you're working with? What are the weight range? What are the health or the conditions? If you're creating something for an elderly population, you have this super complex software medical device, they're probably not going to be able to operate it if it's a software medical device intended to be used at home. Yet if you have a younger audience, who have access to smartphones, computers, etc., they may be able to get on with your device a lot quicker. So something you need to consider as well. And again, if they have certain health or conditions, if you're creating a software medical device to help somebody who has sight problems, but then they're not able to see your software medical device properly in terms of visual, is that really the best way of going about it? So again, little things like this is what you need to be doing. So that's when it comes to patient population. So limitations and contraindications, that's another one you want to consider as what is the limitations of your device? Is it maybe areas that it can't cover? There's nothing wrong with having limitations to your device, but you want to be saying early on in terms of who that actually is. Intended user groups, like I was saying, the elderly populations, if this is going to be a software medical device used by, let's say, someone who's a heart surgeon, who's had 20 years of experience, you can use quite complex terminology in terms of its operation and how it works. But if this something's going to be used by the lay user at home and maybe doesn't have these qualifications or experience in heart surgery, are they going to be able to understand the terminology? So again, also with the user groups, we want to be considering who is the primary user and the secondary user. So a lot of times people consider the primary users, but they don't consider the secondary and also the tertiary users. So a primary user, for example, like I was saying, a heart surgeon, it would be the heart surgeon. There's also going to be secondary users. Maybe the nurse is going to be supporting that surgeon. And the third one to consider is tertiary users. You may have IT support companies who may need access to the software medical device if there's bug fixing or anything like that involved. So consider all of the different user groups. Intended parts of the body. So again, this is not really applicable to a software medical device, but again, if you have a physical element to the medical device that we're talking about, like a PEM system, and is touching a part of the body, that's something you may want to consider. Intended use environment, again, sterile, doesn't really apply to software medical devices. Single or reusable, so again, this is if you have a physical element to it. An interesting one as well, ambulance use. Ambulance is a very high stress, high noise environment. For example, if you have an alarm system, you want it to be really loud to be able to heard in an ambulance. If there's something being used at home, you want it to be a little bit quieter. So again, you need to have all these factors in there as well. And then of course, operating principle. What does it mean by that? You need to design a medical device of which is tailored to the intended users. Factors you need to consider, like we talked about age groups, linguistics. If you create a software medical device that's in English and you ship that off to somewhere in Asia, how many people are going to be able to operate that device, right? It's something that you have to consider. You also have to consider the literacy rate of the demographic that you're going into, the level of education. Also potential disabilities. As the end user of your product may have potential disabilities. Are they going to be able to use it properly? So again, these are all the questions that you want to have at the start. Now, you can quite easily see that if you haven't answered these questions correctly, you may go on to end up developing a software medical device of which doesn't really fit your intended user. So this is something that I really recommend that you invest a lot of time in at the early stages. Nail down what you want your software medical device to be. And then what you can do is you can consult with an expert in that particular field, and they can tell you what's possible. Say, hey, look, I don't think that you'll be able to target this disease, but maybe if you target this one, that's what your clinical data says. So again, spending time in this is a great return on investment, because this will seriously nail down what your software medical device is. And then you can start building your clinical data, you can start developing it. And this would also highlight to you the potential risks that you may come across with the device. So this is something that I really say to people, you really got to nail this one down. This is very important. There's only one thing you take away from today, is get your intended use statement back on. So how exactly do you develop a software? So again, if this is general software actually as well. So the two different types of software that we have in software development, is Agile and Waterfall. So what exactly is the difference between Agile and Waterfall? So Waterfall is more of a traditional software development process, effectively. How it works is it's very sequential, so one after the other. And then Agile is a little bit more sort of the modern way of doing it. So again, with Waterfall, there's a strong focus on documentation of records. With Agile, it's more about teams and interactions and working with software and customer collaborations, etc. So how it exactly works. So what is the key differences between Waterfall and Agile? So Agile is more of a iterative approach, and your development in terms of short sprints. So sprints is basically working in 2-week blocks. That's usually it. Generally with the companies I work with, they work in 2-week blocks. Some companies may work in longer periods. Waterfall, on the other hand, is more sequential. Now, when you have a sequential structure and you realize you made a mistake, it's sometimes hard to backtrack, because with Agile, it allows you to do that. So Agile is more modern, it's more flexible, it's more adaptive. And with Waterfall, it's a little bit more rigid. It's a little bit the old way of doing things. And then with Agile, when it comes to software development lifecycle, a lot of the phases overlap and begin early on in the software development lifecycle phases, i.e. planning. Now, the issue with Waterfall, of course, is the software development lifecycle phases are followed in order. So again, if you find an issue with one, it's going to be hard to go back, whereas with Agile, because they overlap, it's quite easy to correct on the fly. With Waterfall, responsibilities can be quite rigid in terms of who does what, whereas with Agile, it tends to be a little bit more flow to it. And again, it's all to do with mindset as well. So generally, when it comes down to software development, Agile is the one that people tend to use, and that's the one that I recommend. But again, there are issues with Agile as well. So the issue is with Agile is there is no sort of coherent system design like there is with Waterfall, because it's the way that it's done. So again, and then Agile and Waterfall is something that is used by software developers, but again, it's not the only be and all way to do this. So again, these are the two common ones. There are other ways that you can go over our software development as well. So cybersecurity, this is an interesting one. So I put my hands up here, is that I am not a cybersecurity expert. I'm still learning and studying about cybersecurity, but I'm well aware of what you need to do effectively to impress the regulators and make sure that these issues don't happen. So again, when it comes down to cybersecurity guidance, one thing I really do have to say is the FDA is definitely leading the way with this. The guidance documents are really good. So if we have a look at what's being quoted here by the FDA, as per section 524BC of the FDA Act, it defines what's known as a cyber device. So that's a device that includes software that's been validated, installed, or authorized by the sponsor as a device or in a device, and has the ability to connect to the internet. So you can imagine that now. So what exactly are the FDA saying that you need to have here? So you need to submit a plan to monitor, identify, address as appropriate, in reasonable time, exploits, disclosure and related procedures. That's right. You need to design, develop and maintain processes and procedures to provide a reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are cyber secure. How do you prove it's cyber secure? My recommendation is either you hire a cybersecurity expert, or you use one of these very many companies that are coming up that specialize within cybersecurity, ideally one that's worked with medical devices before and understand the importance of regulation. And then of course provide a software bill of materials, and that's it. So when it comes down to cybersecurity, my recommendation here, this is something that you leave to the experts that understand cybersecurity in and out. And ideally, you want to work with somebody who's worked with medical devices before. This is not really something I recommend that you should be trying yourself, as it can get quite complex. And the last thing you want, of course, even if you do get a regulatory approval, is for your device, your fantastic device that you spend millions and millions on and is out there saving lives, then begins to fail and has a cybersecurity attack and cause potential harm or loss or injury to anybody. It's the last thing that anybody wants. So pitfalls, what are the common pitfalls I see within companies or software medical device companies? Introducing a quality management system far too late. Now, again, naturally, as the things I talked about today, software development lifecycle often forms part of your design and development. As part of your quality management system, you're going to have design and development procedures. If you don't have a quality management system and you don't have design and development procedures, all of your design records possibly are going to be partially completed, not exist, and then you're going to have to do them in retrospective. Get your QMS in the early days, get those document processes in the early days to avoid these issues. Number two is not educating everyone in the company on why this stuff is important. So again, with software medical device companies, you may have the quality and reg guys who understand this completely, and then you might have some software developers who may not take this stuff seriously. So straight away from the start, you are a medical device manufacturer that just happens to be a software. These are the rules and regulations, and this is what we must abide by. Educate that into the people in the company at the start, otherwise there will be friction between the departments. Thinking of quality as a department, yes, there are quality and regulatory departments. However, quality is embedded in throughout all the process in the company. Quality is a way of working. Don't just see it as a department, but just see it as something that should be in the company in every single process. Number four is underestimating the resources required. The amount of times I've had companies come up to me and say, hey, we've developed a software medical device and we're looking to get onto the EU market in 3 months. Great, where's your QMS? You don't have one. Where's your technical documentation? We're kind of working on it. So this is something that you need to think about, the amount of resources required. And for the US FDA, not doing a pre-submission. Now, we don't have an equivalent of this in the UK and EU. The only equivalent is you'll probably have to speak to a consultant like myself and we can talk for you for experience. But with the pre-submission process, I mean, it's free of charge. You can speak to the FDA completely free of charge and say, hey, look, this is what we think. Is this viable? Is this something that you're going to work with? And you get feedback from them. And this is something I'm going to give a top tip for. When working with the FDA, get written feedback rather than verbally on a call. At least then you can have something in writing where they told you X, Y, Z, and you can stand by that. Cybersecurity, as we were talking about in the previous slide, put it into your risk management. Don't treat it as something separate, because cybersecurity in itself can introduce risks. If somebody hacks your software medical device, it may start giving false positives, it may start giving false negatives, it may start giving false results, it may tell somebody they have a condition, but they don't have a condition when they do. So that's something you definitely want to risk management. Another one, interestingly, is not having a label on your software. When people think of label, they think of a physical one. Usually in the about section of the software, have like a digital form of a label. For the UK listeners, an example of that would be the UK NHS COVID app. If you go in the about section, you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of a digital label. And again, how to increase collaboration between your software development team and QARA. It goes back to my point at the top, is educating everyone in the company from the start. And then a point I talked about in a few slides earlier, not considering infrastructure. UK hospitals are sometimes having technology in there that's 20 years older than what you have at home. If you create this great software medical device that needs tons of computer power, not really the best situation to put it in. So again, USA, not applying for the small business discount. You know, it can slash down the cost of your 510K, which from what I believe is around $12,000 down to $3,000. Not educating people in the company, as we talked about. And again, final one, of course, is unrealistic investor-driven deadlines. You know, if an investor wants you on the market within 6 months, and then you can't get an audit date for 12 months, something that you need to consider. So which market to enter first, to wrap up the points on? So again, going about the impact, where is the problem and the application intended to solve? And where is it going to have the most impact? Where is the demographic that needs that particular device? What are the infrastructure requirements there? What is the return on investment? Have you discussed your options with a health economist? And what are the training requirements for the product users in relation to the competency of the users? Factors to consider. So to summarize, Software as a medical device does not have to be difficult if you prepare adequate resources, then do it right the first time. They may be time intensive, but it doesn't have to be difficult. Get your intended use statement. So my biggest takeaway today, if you forget anything I've spoken about, is just please make sure you get your intended use statement correct first time round. Proper planning is key to success in this. Include cybersecurity into your risk management. Implement your quality management system early on. And whether your software falls under a medical device or not is often driven by the claims that you make about it. Thank you very much for listening all, and Dwayne, I'll be happy to take any questions that have come in.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot for that, Karandeep. That was great. Other side note, you could tell on Karandeep's picture here, but if you ever see him at a conference, he will be the best dressed person there. No questions about it. Karandeep says some questions that kind of came in here while you were chatting. There were some that were pre as well, but I'm going to kind of go through some of these ones here. What about the integration of the hardware needed to use a software as a medical device? How is this integrated into the technical documentation? What does EMC issues, what about EMC issues with this hardware?
Yeah, definitely. So you need to treat it as a piece of the device. So even if it is a software medical device, you need to be looking to EMC, you need to be looking at biocompatibility if it's touching certain parts of the body. So again, you almost got to kind of treat it as if it was a physical medical device in a sense. And again, if you are going to be adding a physical element to your software as a medical device, there will be additional requirements like we talked about with things like EMC. You might need to look into IEC 60601 as well, electromagnetic compatibility. So there's a lot of factors you do have to consider.
Awesome. With the prospect of the EU's directive NIS2 nearing the mandated adoption deadline by the member nations at the end of October 2024, how should one factor in Article 21(2) of the NIS2 that requires affected companies, for example, hospitals, to comply, whereby potential big customers are now expected to ensure supply chain security? The NIS2 doesn't lay out any requirements or details for this article, which makes any efforts by the manufacturer a quote unquote best guess. That was a long question. Do you mean me repeat any of that?
I don't know the article off by heart. So again, by all means, contact me offline and I'll be happy to discuss that because that is going to be quite a complex answer.
Yeah, great. When you divide your software into different components and state that one portion is a software as a medical device, other components are not software as a medical device, are the other components accessories? For example, I have a library of tests that are the software as a medical device, but the app that is needed to access the test is not a software as a medical. There's not a medical device. Is the app an accessory? And what should you be adding to your technical documentation for CE mark in the EU?
It all depends on what you've stated in your intended use statement, how your software works and how those particular components integrate into it. So again, if you want to provide me further details and discuss this offline, I can tell you about what that will be specifically.
Perfect. Another question just came in. Thanks a lot for the webinar. I have a question. What are the requirements, QMS or documentation for non-medical device software used in healthcare?
There's no requirement for a quality management system in that case. If you're not a medical device, then you don't need a quality management system. But again, I've seen other companies out there who are just medical software who maybe go for 9001. So it's not like 13485 for medical devices. So if you think it's beneficial for you to have a quality management system, by all means, you can have one. But it's not mandatory.
Understood. Yeah. Okay. If you use a piece of software to just configure, for example, enter patient information, and then launch another piece of software that actually does all the processing, does the first piece of software have to also be part of the software as a medical device, or can it be classified as MDDS? I think this is kind of going back to your answer. Yeah.
Intended use statement. Yeah, it's all to do with what you claim.
Okay. Great. Yeah, these seem like pretty hyper-focused questions. Let me look at some of the ones that were before the webinar. Impact of EU AI Act on software as a medical device.
It's an interesting one as well because, if you have a software medical device, you're pretty much already regulated. The stuff that you're doing is under scrutiny anyway, and you're quite used to having to provide this documentation. I really think the AI Act is probably going to be affecting the medical software that hasn't been regulated in the past. So if it's using AI and is considered to be sort of a medium risk or high risk, now all of a sudden this sort of software that's never been under scrutiny before now has to come in line with the AI Act. Now I do admit here that I'm still studying the AI Act. I haven't fully understood it yet, so I don't really know about the impact it's going to have on the medical device industry, but I don't think it will be very huge considering how regulated and how stringent the software medical device space is at the moment.
Okay. You already differentiate between MDDS or non-device and device. What are the pain points of implementation of design control QMS procedures throughout software development, especially in evolving regulatory landscapes? Impending EU AI Act is referenced, emergence of AI-related ISO IEC standards, cybersecurity requirements, etc.
Yeah, very much so. So every time you are doing your design and development, and there's various different standards and like new acts may be coming into place, you're going to want to be doing impact assessment depending on the changes that you make to your device. But I think the real key here and the real pain point when it comes to design controls is maybe treating the design controls and the software development lifecycle as two different processes. I'm a big fan of integrating both the design controls and the software development lifecycle into one procedure. So the idea being that both are done concurrently because there's so much overlap between the two. The second pain point, of course, is when you've semi-developed the software and then you want to start implementing design controls. That semi-development up to date never had a full design control process, so you never really figure out why certain changes were made or whether impact assessments were made. So the key here is to bring in the design controls very, very early on in your quality management system. And even if you don't have a quality management system, why not just have a design control procedure that's conforming to ISO 13485, EU MDR, etc., and just use it anyway? And then when you are in a position to have a full QMS, then you can bring it in. So at least then you follow the processes to the book.
Okay, great. You mentioned you should pay attention to whether there is infrastructure, whether the infrastructure is there to run the software. Could everything be done just in a cloud environment instead?
It can be done, but then does that particular jurisdiction has easy internet access and does it have the required bandwidth in order for that cloud platform to be used? So that's something that you need to look into. And again, do people have the required tools, i.e. mobile phones or computers? And is there a stable sort of infrastructure in terms of electricity in order for them to have access to that? And then of course costs, if you're in a region of the world where people don't necessarily have the resource to go out and buy these things, then they won't be able to reach that cloud.
Yeah, okay. Please explain how SBOM can be embedded in initial stage of life cycle of software as a medical device.
Contact me directly on that one. I need a little bit more information.
Perfect. All right. I'll say this one. This is a good one to end on. There's a medical device student who must have been tuning into this, and they talk about, there's no software that isn't being taught. There isn't a computer language they're not teaching. So what are the job opportunities in this field?
It's quite an interesting one. So again, you don't necessarily have to be from a medical device background to work in a software medical device companies. I see guys coming from IT, gaming, etc., who have these software development skills and then join a software medical device company. I think the job prospects in this sector are very good at the moment. Software medical devices very much so is in its early stages. Medical device is a great industry to be in, and in comparison to pharma, I wouldn't go as far as saying pharmaceuticals are saturated, but pharmaceuticals are well established. MedTech in general, and Dwayne, I'm sure you would agree, you work in this space too, is still in its baby phases. It's still growing. Nobody really knows how far it's going to go. So again, if you want to enter a career where you really want to grow, and then maybe you can diversify, maybe you work in development and say, hey, this isn't for me. You can then maybe go into regulatory, you can maybe go into a different space. But there's a lot of opportunities in MedTech at the moment. And I really think it's a great way for a student to sort of grow quickly.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think that something that was written about at the beginning of 2023, and I think we saw it play out all year, was, and you showed your wearable, right? Like I'm wearing this Garmin watch here, but with the new wearables and software, I mean, MedTech has a front row seat to the healthcare of the future just through that, right? Obviously, you have standard medical devices that treat things and stuff like that, and you have drugs that do that. But this whole monitoring aspect is going to be done by the MedTech community for the most part, and that's a really interesting space to see grow and evolve. And so I think you're going to see the emergence of, like you said, a lot of different kinds of engineers kind of come in and do some of those things. So it's going to be an interesting time here in the next 10, 15 years. But obviously, I mean, you're a medtech person, and my company is literally called Project MedTech, so I'm super biased. Last question, and then we'll go here,
Sure.
Karandeep. As a QA of the company, what would be the role in implementing the software as a medical device and software firmware related component of the device?
So then you would need to make sure that whoever the software development team that is handling that is adhering to the procedures that you have in place. It may be that because you may not understand that process, you maybe need to work with that developer to tailor that process and reflect it in the procedure. Because again, if the software developer can't work to your procedure, they're going to go and they do it their own way, which in itself is a non-conformity because you're not following procedures. So find out whoever is the person that's going to be doing the technical aspect with you, have them explain it to you, and ensure that the procedure aligns in the way that they're going to do it. But not just that, that the procedure also remains compliant when you make those changes.
Great. Karandeep, that's everything. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone for listening in, joining us today. This was the last Galen Data webinar series of the year, the 39th, and so 40 will be next year. And happy holidays to everyone, and we'll see you soon.
See you later, guys.